achieve optimal use whilst offering new services and not squeezing out the existing services is certainly a laudable objective. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. I'd now like to hand the floor to representatives of those member states that would like to speak.
Nous avons entendu des...
We have heard from some of the older member states. Perhaps now we could hear from one of the most recent member states. Slovenia, please. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair, Madam. Thank you very much. I'll be very short. A lot of things have been already said here about the frequency spectrum usage and the efficiency. I would just like to point out some points which are critical to us and that we would like to point out. To our opinion, we do support all the actions of the European Commission on the efficient use of the frequency spectrum. And to achieve this, it is necessary to us to ensure an efficient use of frequency spectrum. There are two ways of efficient use. One is to use efficient coding techniques and algorithms. For instance, to switch from MPEG-4 from MPEG-2 to MPEG-4 coding for the television broadcasting. The other thing is, of course, to use the spectrum continuously. It is not used continuously, which is the case in many times. In that case, we should use, or to ensure, sharing of this, time sharing of the spectrum. Second thing is to enable equal use of the spectrum based on the equal rights of all countries and not on the legacy presumptions of some countries. There are some cases that the legacy situation dictates the usage of the spectrum. We believe that it is the equality of the rights of all countries that should dictate this use. Third thing is not to delay the analog switch off in order to maintain legacy high power broadcasting transmissions, which, as we all know, are analog and thus have very low efficiency of the spectrum usage. Next thing is, to us, is very important to clear up the 800 megahertz frequency span as soon as possible in order to use it for broadband services and for enhanced communication services. In our country, we are going to switch off all the analog broadcasting transmitters as of 1st of December this year. And we would like that all the other countries would stick to the dates that have been provided by the Commission. And as a result of this, we believe that, we have to maintain the international coordination of the frequency spectrum management in addition to the European harmonization of the spectrum usage. This is important because frequency spectrum is becoming more and more crowded. And we believe that we should not jeopardize new communication services in order to, let's say, give the space to the broadcasting services, which in some cases are certainly too crowded. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for those very useful comments. Who would like to follow on from our Slovenian representative?
United Kingdom, je vous en prie.
You have the floor, United Kingdom.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'll be very brief indeed. I'm sorry we're not a new member state, but then we're probably not a very old member state either. We're just a member sort of state. And I was going to intervene earlier, but I had to consult Gordon Brown for the instructions, which I've now got. But to start with, I'm going to try and answer three questions very, very briefly indeed. The first question is, what are the decisions that we have to take? And I think we've heard some very interesting remarks both in the first session and the second session this afternoon, and no doubt we're going to hear interesting remarks throughout this summit, which, as I've said before, I think is extremely valuable. And what comes across, I think, is that we can't have all that we want, that not everyone can have everything, that we do have to make decisions, and some of those decisions are not going to necessarily please everyone. Now, it is true that technological advance, sharing of spectrum, cognitive radio, use of the white spaces might ease some of the decisions that we have to make, but we still have to make some decisions. In the announcements last week in the United States, clearly some decisions have been made there. Whether those decisions are good for the broadcasters or whether they're not so good remains to be seen. But as we go forward in the European Union, and to address some of the comments that have been made by our parliamentarians, which we're very grateful for, we have to choose, to an extent, what Europe wants to be. Are we going to compete on a harmonised basis? Because if we are going to compete on a harmonised basis, then we too in member states have to make decisions. We too perhaps have to take the hit that some of us probably didn't want to take last year. We have to make decisions, but also the industry has to make decisions on the way we go forward, how we balance the economic, the social, the cultural aspects of what we want to be as a European community. And that's why we have the balance between the Commission, the Council and the Parliament. Second point, what do we need to do in safeguarding competition, in safeguarding access to this valuable spectrum? It's a point that came over earlier in some of the remarks. And there I think we have to be very careful that in anything we do, we need to ensure that there is competition. The wireless space, the mobile space are entering a new arena. We're going to have to look again at the competitive levers we have in our framework to ensure that there can be adequate access to spectrum by all competitors and not just the incumbents. We have to look at hoarding. We have to look at the use of our spectrum. We have to look at the efficiency of the use of our spectrum, as various people have said before. We cannot have a situation where we are perhaps depriving people of spectrum that they've had or they could use for operators that aren't using it efficiently. We have to take decisions in that area as well. And finally, Madam Chair, let's look at the international role that the European Union can play, both at the ITU and in other international fora. Let's be bold. Let the European Union play a significant role in the future global discussions. Let us trust the European Union a bit more. Let us act as a European Union in those discussions and make real progress. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour...
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for those comments, which I think also shed some light on just how far we've got in our work, especially after these moments of tension and confrontation, in particular between the broadcasters and telephony operators, because we know, of course, that there is a certain degree of competition between them to be able to have access to these frequencies. And we are going to be hearing from two more stakeholders now, Mr. Vittorio Valero, who's representing the region of Piemonte, and we're also going to be hearing from Mr. Usama Uzani, who is head of broadcasting networks at Lagardère Active. So first of all, I'd like to ask Mr. Valero to speak.
Good afternoon to everybody, and thanks. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks a lot for the great chance you're giving to a region to bring his own view of the matter. I think that a few words about our region could be useful to make you understand what we are talking about. Piedmont region is situated in northwest Italy. It has a population of about 4,200,000 people. And it's a very difficult situation from the morphological point of view.